Picture this. You are a woman standing on the edge of nowhere, the sun a merciless hammer in the sky. 5 small children, your children, huddle behind you, their faces smudged with dust and tears. Your husband, the man who promised you a future, is a fresh ghost in the earth, and his name, the one he never legally gave you, has become a curse. His brother, a man of cold iron and colder law, has declared you a trespasser, an inconvenient memory on land he now owns. He has cast you out with nothing but the worn clothes on your backs and the crushing weight of a future you cannot see. You are nameless. You are homeless. Your only possession is the fierce, desperate love for the 5 souls who look to you for salvation. What do you do? When the world has decreed you do not exist, where do you find the strength to begin again? This was Alara's world, a landscape of heartbreak and horizons that offered no hope. The dust from the wagon wheels of the men who had evicted her still hung in the air, a bitter fog that mirrored the confusion in her heart. She stood before the small, weathered shack that had been her home, its door now barred, its windows like vacant eyes. Behind her, 12-year-old Leo tried to be brave, his small jaw set in a grim imitation of his father's, but his trembling hands betrayed him. 10-year-old Clara clutched the hands of the 7-year-old twins, Samuel and Anna, whose silent, synchronized fear was a knife in Alara's soul. And little Rose, only 5, buried her face in the folds of Alara's skirt, her small body shaking with sobs she was too tired to voice. The man who had taken everything, Mayor Thornton, her own brother-in-law, had called them phantoms, a stain on his family's pristine legacy. "You have no name," he had sneered, his voice slicing through her grief. "Therefore you have no claim." With the last of the daylight bleeding from the sky, a cruel wind began to stir, whipping sand into their faces. A storm was coming. Not a gentle rain, but a brutal, sweeping gale that promised to scour the plains clean. Alara knew they couldn't stay here. She gathered her children, her voice a strained whisper against the rising wind. "We walk," she said, her own words sounding hollow and foolish. "We just have to walk." They trudged away from the only home the children had ever known, a tiny, desperate procession against an indifferent wilderness. The wind tore at them, stealing their warmth, their breath, their resolve. Each step was an act of faith in a God she was no longer sure she believed in. Hours bled into one another. Darkness fell, thick and absolute, broken only by the distant, angry flashes of lightning. Rose had to be carried. The twins stumbled, their energy gone. It was Leo who saw it first, a faint, flickering speck of gold in the oppressive blackness. A light, hope, fragile and distant, bloomed in Alara's chest. With the last of her strength, she steered her broken family toward it, praying it was not a mirage, not another cruel trick of the unforgiving land. The light belonged to a small, sturdy cabin, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods that fought against the wind. It was the home of Silas Cole, a man as weathered and solitary as the landscape he inhabited. A deep scar, running from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth, gave his face a permanent, somber severity. He was a man who had made a covenant with silence long ago, after the fever took his wife and infant son, leaving him with nothing but the ranch and a heart walled off with stone. He was checking the latch on his barn when he saw them, figures materializing out of the swirling dust and darkness like apparitions. He watched as the woman, her body language a testament to utter exhaustion, collapsed to her knees just yards from his fence line. The children fell around her, a small, sorrowful heap. For a long moment Silas did nothing. The world had taught him that compassion was a vulnerability, that attachment was the certain path to pain. His first instinct was to bar his own door, to let the storm and the world deal with its own. But then, a flash of lightning illuminated the face of the smallest child. Her cheek pressed against the cold ground, and in that fleeting image, he saw the ghost of his own son. The stone wall around his heart did not crumble, but a single hairline crack appeared. With a heavy sigh that seemed to pull up years of buried grief, he unlatched his gate and walked out into the tempest. He did not offer words of comfort. They were a language he had forgotten. He simply lifted the unconscious woman into his arms, her body shockingly light, and then, one by one, he gathered the children and carried them into the warmth and safety of his barn. He laid them on clean hay, covered them with thick wool blankets, and left a lit lantern, a bucket of fresh water, and a loaf of bread before retreating back into the solitude of his cabin, the silence of his home now feeling different. It was no longer peaceful. It was merely empty. When Alara awoke, the storm had quieted to a mournful howl. For a moment, she was suspended in terror, the unfamiliar scent of hay and livestock filling her senses. Then memory returned, a crushing wave. She sat up, her eyes frantically searching the dim, lantern-lit space. She saw them, her children, all 5 of them, sleeping soundly under thick, warm blankets. An offering of food and water sat nearby. Tears of relief, hot and sudden, streamed down her face. A stranger had shown them a mercy the world had denied. The next morning, Silas found her outside the barn, mending one of her children's torn shirts with a needle and thread she had guarded in her pocket. The children were huddled nearby, watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Alara stood as he approached, her posture straight and proud despite the frayed edges of her dress and the exhaustion etched onto her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We are in your debt. We will be on our way as soon as the children have rested." Silas merely grunted, his gaze sweeping over the small, fragile family. He saw the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, the same fire he once had in his own. "Storm's not done," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Roads will be mud. You can't travel." He gestured toward the barn. "Stay. There's work if you've a mind for it. You can earn your keep." It was not an offer of charity, but a transaction, a way for him to maintain his distance, to keep the arrangement from touching his heart. Alara nodded, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes that she quickly masked. "We will earn our keep," she agreed. Thus began a delicate, unspoken truce. Days turned into a week, then 2. Alara, a woman of tireless energy, brought a quiet order to the chaos of Silas's bachelor existence. The small cabin, which he had grudgingly allowed her and the girls to sleep in while he and the boys stayed in the barn, began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. The scent of baking bread replaced the stale air of loneliness. The sound of children's laughter, at first tentative and then more confident, began to fill the spaces between the wind's sighs. Silas watched from a distance, a silent observer of the strange new ecosystem on his land. He watched Alara hang laundry on a line she'd strung between 2 trees, her movements graceful and efficient. He saw her patience with the twins as she taught them their letters, scratching symbols in the dirt with a stick. He saw her strength as she hauled water from the well without complaint. She never asked for anything, but she gave everything she had. The children, too, began to thaw his frozen world. Clara, with her mother's quiet grace, would leave a wildflower on the porch railing for him each morning. The twins, once they lost their fear of his scarred face, would watch him work, their eyes wide with wonder as he mended a saddle or shod a horse. Rose, the youngest, finally broke through his reserve. One afternoon, she approached him while he was carving a piece of wood, and with the unfiltered honesty of a child, she placed her tiny hand over the scar on his face. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. Silas froze, the knife still in his hand. No one had dared to touch his scar in a decade. He looked down into her innocent eyes and, for the first time in years, he spoke of his past. "It used to," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not so much anymore." From that day on, a subtle shift occurred. He began to teach Leo how to ride, how to read the sky for weather, the small but essential skills of a rancher. He saw the boy's desperate need for a father figure and, hesitantly, he began to fill that void. He found himself listening for their voices, his solitude now punctuated by an awareness of their presence. He was still a man apart, but he was no longer entirely alone. One evening, as Alara was banking the fire in the cabin, he entered, holding a small, intricately carved wooden bird. He held it out to her wordlessly. It was for Rose. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The brief contact sent a jolt through both of them, an acknowledgement of the fragile, growing connection between them. "You are a good man, Silas Cole," she said softly, looking at him directly. His gaze, usually so guarded, met hers, and in their depths, she saw not just sorrow, but a profound and gentle kindness he worked so hard to conceal. "You are a strong woman, Elara," he replied, and the simple, unadorned truth of his words was more meaningful than any flowery compliment. It was a statement of respect, an admission that he saw her, truly saw her, not as a nameless burden, but as a survivor. That night, Silas lay awake in the barn, the sound of Leo's steady breathing nearby a strange comfort. He thought of Elara, of the quiet dignity that radiated from her, of the fierce love that made her a lioness for her cubs. He was beginning to realize that the stone wall around his heart was not just keeping the world out, it was keeping him locked inside. For the first time, he wondered if there might be a life for him beyond the ghosts of his past. But peace on the frontier is a fleeting thing, and shadows from the world beyond their sanctuary were beginning to lengthen. The fragile peace of their found world was shattered on a crisp autumn afternoon. A rider appeared on the horizon, not a weary traveler, but a man who rode with the arrogant certainty of the law on his side. It was the town sheriff, and behind him, sitting straight and imperious in a polished buggy, was Mayor Thornton. Silas saw them coming from a mile off. He felt a cold dread settle in his gut, the same feeling he'd had the day the doctor told him there was nothing more to be done for his wife. He strode out to the porch, his hand resting instinctively on the handle of the axe he'd been using to chop wood. Elara came out of the cabin, her face pale, the children gathering behind her skirts like chicks seeking the shelter of a mother hen. Thornton's eyes, small and hard, swept over the scene with contempt. He ignored Silas completely, fixing his gaze on Elara. "So, this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Living in a barn like the animal you are. I have come to collect you and these mistakes. The county has a place for vagrants and orphans. A workhouse. It is a more fitting home for those without a name." "She is not a vagrant," Silas's voice boomed, low and dangerous, a rumble of thunder before a storm. He stepped off the porch, placing himself squarely between Thornton's buggy and the family huddled by the cabin door. "She and her children are on my land." At my invitation, Thornton finally deigned to look at him, a sneer twisting his lips. "Silas Cole, the town recluse. Harboring this filth does you no credit. The law is the law. They have no legal guardian, no name to claim. The sheriff has a court order. They are wards of the state, and the state has placed them in my care to be transported." He produced a piece of paper, waving it like a weapon. The sheriff, a man named Davis who looked deeply uncomfortable, shifted in his saddle. "Silas, my hands are tied," he said apologetically. "It's all legal." Elara's heart plummeted. The workhouse. It was a prison sentence, a place that would shatter her family, scattering her children to the four winds. She felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled her knees. But then she looked at Leo, his face a mask of defiant terror, and the fire inside her roared back to life. She would not let this happen. She would fight even if it was with her bare hands. But Silas moved first. He took another step forward, his shadow falling over Thornton. His face was granite, the scar a livid white against his tanned skin. His eyes, however, burned with a cold, clear fire. "You speak of law and names," Silas said, his voice unervingly calm. "You say they have no one. You are wrong." He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Elara's. In that one look, a universe of unspoken understanding passed between them. He saw her fear, her strength, her worth. She saw his resolve, his honor, his protection. It was a silent vow, made in the space of a heartbeat. Silas turned back to Thornton, his voice ringing across the yard with the clarity of a church bell. "They are not nameless," he declared, each word a stone laid in the foundation of a new reality. "Because their name will be mine, A collective gasp went through the small audience. The sheriff's jaw dropped. Thornton stared, his arrogance momentarily replaced by sheer disbelief. Alara felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a hope so powerful it was painful. Silas did not waver. He looked straight at the sputtering mayor. "This woman," he said, his voice growing stronger, "Alara will be my wife. These children will be my children. They are my family. They are under my protection. On my land. Their name is Cole." The declaration hung in the air, immutable and absolute. It was a truth spoken into existence by sheer force of will. Thornton, recovering his composure, began to laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. "You cannot be serious. You would marry this roadside stray? You would tarnish your own name for her. My name has been gathering dust in a silent house for 10 years. Silas shot back, his voice raw with the pain of his past. "She and these children have brought more honor to it in 2 months than you have brought to yours in a lifetime of hiding behind money and lawyers." He took a final step forward, standing so close to the buggy that the horse shied away. "Now, get off my land." The moral ground had shifted completely. This was no longer a matter of vagrancy law. It was a man defending his family. Sheriff Davis, a decent man at heart, had seen enough. He straightened in his saddle. "Mayor," he said, his tone firm, "this is no longer a county matter. Silas Cole has claimed them. This is his property, and that is his family. We have no jurisdiction here." Thornton's face turned a mottled shade of purple. He had been outmaneuvered, his legal weapon rendered useless by a simple, powerful act of human decency. He glared at Silas, his eyes promising retribution, then at Alara, his face a mask of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed, but the threat was empty. He had lost. With a sharp crack of the reins, he turned his buggy around, retreating in a cloud of dust and humiliation. As the buggy disappeared over the rise, a profound silence descended, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the cottonwoods. Alara stood frozen, the words Silas had spoken echoing in her soul. "My wife, my children, my family." Slowly, she walked toward him, her legs unsteady. The children followed, sensing the monumental shift that had just occurred. She stopped in front of him, looking up into the face that was no longer fearsome, but beautiful in its strength and resolve. "Silas," she began, her voice choked with emotion, but no other words would come. He simply reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. In that small gesture, a lifetime of loneliness began to dissolve for them both. Then little Rose broke the spell. She ran forward and wrapped her tiny arms around Silas's leg, looking up at him with shining eyes. "Is your name our name now?" she asked. Silas looked down, and the stern, sorrowful lines of his face softened into a smile. A real smile that reached his eyes and made him look like a different man. He knelt down, gathering her into a hug. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "Yes, it is." One by one, the other children came forward, Leo last of all, hesitant but with a look of dawning hero worship on his face. Silas put his arms around all of them, pulling them into a messy, unpracticed group hug, with Alara standing at the edge of the circle, her hand resting on his shoulder, her heart overflowing. The broken pieces of 2 shattered lives, and the 5 small souls caught between them, had finally found their way home. They were no longer nameless. They were a family. What truly defines a family? Is it a name written on a piece of paper, a legal document filed away in a dusty courthouse? Or is it something more profound? Is it found in a shared meal in a warm cabin on a cold night? Is it forged in the fire of adversity, in the moment one person stands in the gap to protect another? We often believe our identity is given to us, by birth or by law. But perhaps our truest identity is the one we choose, the one we build through acts of love, courage, and sacrifice. Think about the Silas in your own life or the Alara, the people who stepped in when the world stepped away, the ones who offered a hand when all you knew was the fist. Because in the end, a name is just a word, but a family is a promise. It's the promise that you are not alone, that you are seen, that you are loved. It's the promise of home. What do you think? Who makes a family? Share your story of a found family in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more tales of hope and the enduring power of the human heart.